So this will be another reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And we're in chapter 14 on page 314. The name of the title of the chapter is Instruction to Vaishnavas and Brahmas. And I'll begin with a meditation on Sri Ramakrishna. Om Hridaya Kamala Madhye Rachitam Nirvikalpam Sada Sada Kila Bedam Dhikameka Swarupam Prakriti Vikriti Shunyam Nityam Anandamurtim Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Nirupamamati Sukshmam Nishprapancham Nirhiham Gagana Satrisham Isham Sarvabhuta-divasam Triguna-rahita Satchit Brahma Rupam Varenyam Bimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Vitaritum avatirnam jnana bhakti prashantihi pranaya galita chittam jiva dukkha sahishnu drita sahaja samadhim chinmayam komalangam bimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnam bhajamaha. This knower of Brahman, ever established in his own nature, full of wisdom, self-possessed and self-lighted, eternal, the very image of that Brahman who is pure bliss, shining ceaselessly in the lotus of the heart, one alone and without parts, pure and still. This Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Subtle, fine, and luminous, not even the shadow of the gross can ever reach him, for his purity is without parallel. Untouched by Maya's webs of deceit, beyond the dark river of time and desire, vast as the sky, this Supreme Lord, the very essence of Brahman as existence and light, this Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Saturated with divine consciousness, his home is in all. He hears every cry. He knows every pain. Under the weight of its compassion, his heart can deny the need of none. Born to raise the world with teachings of knowledge, love, and peace. Born to bring mankind fresh songs of joy. This certain refuge of all, this Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa, the Paramatman Supreme, we adore. So, probably you remember, I've been reading a little bit about different disciples, and because many of them came to Sri Ramakrishna right at this time that the gospel was being written. And it's nice to have some stories of how they came and some interaction that they had with Ramakrishna. So today I'm taking up Babaram, who later became Swami Premananda. And I'll just start with some reading about him. On the 20th of June in 1884, so let me just see what date we're on in this section. It's 1883 in the section that we're on, so he's just about to come. Sri Ramakrishna said to him, "You see, I am having some difficulty about my physical needs. It will be nice if Babaram lives with me. The nature of these attendants of mine is undergoing a change. Latu, later Swami Adbhutananda, is always tense with spiritual emotion. He's about to merge himself in God. and Rakal is getting into such a spiritual mood that he can't do anything even for himself. Although several devotees lived with the Master, he could only bear the touch of certain people during his ecstasy. On the 30th of June, he told Baburam, "Do stay with me. It would be very nice. In this mood, I cannot allow others to touch me." Baburam's mother was a devotee of the Master, and when she visited Dakshineswar during this time, the Master asked her, "Will you give me something?" "Yes, sir, whatever you ask," she replied. "Will you give me your son? I want a pure-hearted boy to live here. I'm greatly pleased when he even gives me a glass of water." She at once agreed. "It is my good fortune, sir, that you will accept him and that he will live with you." "What shall I give you?" Sri Ramakrishna asked. She replied, "I have two requests. One is that I may have unflinching devotion for God, and the other is that none of my children dies before I do." Sri Ramakrishna actually granted both of these boons to her. From his childhood, Baburam knew his goal. He was looking for a guru who could help him reach it. He had learned that Rakal often visited the Master, and the next Saturday they visited him together. The Master caught hold of Baburam's hand and said, "Come closer to the light. Let me see your face." He examined Baburam's face, hands, and feet, and he expressed great satisfaction. Then he weighed Baburam's forearm by placing it on his palm. If it was lighter than usual, he would say this showed a beneficent intelligence. And observing this with Baburam, he expressed with joy, "Very good, very good." Later, Baburam reminisced, "The Master used to cry when I left Dakshineswar to return to Calcutta. Oh, how can I explain to you how much he loved us? He would go to Calcutta in a carriage just so he could feed Purna. One day he was found waiting outside Balaram Babu's house where I was staying. The Master was hesitant to go inside, thinking that he might not be welcomed. He'd come to see me. Someone finally called him in. His love knew no bounds, and one drop of it completely filled us. Each of us thought to himself that he was the most beloved of the Master. On other occasions, he described Baburam as a Nitya Siddha, ever-perfect soul, an Ishwara Koti, godlike soul. On the 30th of June, 1884, the Master again said to him, "Yesterday I came to know Baburam's inner nature. That is why I've been trying so hard to persuade him to live with me. Boys like Baburam are pure in heart. They are like a new pot. Milk kept in it will not turn sour. I need Baburam here. I pass through certain spiritual states when I need someone like him." About Baburam's purity, the Master used to say, "He is pure, pure to the very marrow of his bones." So this was one of his young boy disciples who will be arriving shortly. It's 1883 here, and he comes in 1884 to stay with him. He'd already met him, however. And his mother was a devotee as well. He later became Swami Premananda, and although he never initiated people, he was like a mother to the whole monastery. He was a general manager and was much beloved. And there are many stories of how much he attracted others to come to the order. So I am beginning on 3:14. It is narrated in the Bhagavata that the Advadhuta had 24 gurus, one of whom was a kite. In a certain place, the fishermen were catching fish. At the sight of the fish, about 1,000 crows chased the kite and made great noise with their cawing. Whichever way the kite flew with the fish, the crows followed it. The kite flew to the south, and the crows followed right behind. The kite flew to the north, and still the crows followed after it. The kite went east and west, but with the same result. As the kite began to fly about in confusion, lo, the fish dropped from its mouth. The crows at once let the kite alone and flew after the fish. Thus relieved of its worries, the kite sat on a branch of a tree and thought, that wretched fish was the root of all my troubles. I've now got rid of it, and therefore I am at peace. I think there's also a Aesop's fable that is very similar to this story. So Sri Ramakrishna gives these different stories. This one was from the Bhagavatam, actually, a quote from the Bhagavatam. But to illustrate his points that he's trying to make, he will tell stories and parables. But to work without any selfish motive is good. It does not create any worry. But it's very difficult to be totally unselfish. We may think that our work is selfless, but selfishness comes unknown to us from where no one knows. But if a man has already undergone great spiritual discipline, then as a result of it, he may be able to do work without any selfish motive. After the vision of God, a man can easily do unselfish work. In most cases, action falls away after the attainment of God. Only a few, like Narada, work to bring light to mankind. The Advadhuta accepted a bee as another teacher. Bees accumulate their honey by days of hard labor, but they can't enjoy the honey, for a man soon breaks the comb and takes it away. The Advadhuta learned this lesson from the bees, that one should not lay up things. Sadhus should depend 100% on God. They must not gather for the morrow. But this doesn't apply to the householder. He has to bring up his family, and therefore it's necessary for him to provide. Birds and monks do not hoard. Yet birds also hoard after their chicks are hatched. They collect food in their beaks for the young ones. Let me tell you one thing. Vijay, don't trust a sadhu if he keeps a bag and baggage with him and a bundle of clothes with many knots. I have seen such sadhus under the banyan tree in the Panchavati. 2 or 3 of them were seated there. One was picking over the lentils, some were sewing their clothes, and all were gossiping about the feast day where they had enjoyed a feast at a rich man's house. They said among themselves, that rich man spent 100,000 rupees on the feast and fed the sadhus sumptuously with cake, sweets, and many such delicious things. Everybody laughed. Vijay, it's true, sir. I have seen such sadhus at Gaya. They are called the Lotawala sadhus of Gaya. That means sadhus carrying water pots. Master 2, Vijay. When love of God is awakened, work drops away of itself. If God makes some men work, let them work. It is now time for you to give up everything, renounce all and say, O mind, may you and I alone behold the mother, letting no one else intrude. Saying this, Sri Ramakrishna began to sing in his soul-enthralling voice. Cherish my precious mother Shyama tenderly within, O mind. May you and I behold her, letting no one else intrude. O mind, in solitude enjoy her, keeping the passions all outside. Take but the tongue, that now and again it may cry out, Mother, Mother. Suffer no breath of base desire to enter there and approach us, but bid true knowledge stand on guard, alert and watchful evermore. The Master used to say to Vijay, surrender yourself completely to God and set aside all such things as fear and shame. Give up such feelings as, what will people think about me if I dance in ecstasy of God's holy name? The saying, one cannot have the vision of God as long as one has these three, shame, hatred, and fear, is very true. Shame, hatred, fear, caste, pride, secretiveness, and the like are so many bonds. Man is free when he is liberated from all these. When bound by ties, one is jiva, that is the embodied soul. And when free from ties, one is Shiva, that is God himself. Prema, ecstatic love of God, is a rare thing. First of all, one acquires bhakti. Bhakti is single-minded devotion to God, like the devotion a wife feels for her husband. It's very difficult to have unalloyed devotion to God. Through such devotion, one's mind and soul merge in Him. Then comes bhava, intense love. Through bhava, a man becomes speechless. His nerve currents are stilled. Kumbhaka comes by itself. It is like the case of a man whose breath and speech stop when he fires a gun. But prema, ecstatic love, is an extremely rare thing. Chaitanya had that love. When one has prema, one forgets all the outer things. One forgets the world. One even forgets one's own body, which is so dear to man. The Master began to sing, "Oh, when will dawn that blessed day, when tears of joy will flow from my eyes as I repeat Lord Hari's name? Oh, when will dawn that blessed day, when all my craving for the world will vanish straight away from my heart, and with a thrill of his holy name, all my hair will stand on end. Oh, when will dawn that blessed day?" So the talk of divine things was proceeding when some invited Brahmo devotees entered the room. There were among them a few pundits and high government officials. Sri Ramakrishna had said that bhava stills the nerve currents of the devotees. He continued, when Arjuna was about to shoot at the target, the eye of a fish, his eyes were fixed on the eye of the fish and on nothing else. He didn't even notice any part of the fish except the eye. In such a state, the breathing stops and one experiences kumbhaka. Another characteristic of God vision is that a great spiritual current rushes up along the spine and goes to the brain. If then the devotee goes into samadhi, he sees God. Looking at the Brahmo devotees who had just arrived, the Master said, "Mere pundits devoid of divine love talk incoherently." Pandit Samandayi once said in the course of his sermon, "God is dry, make him sweet by your love and devotion." Imagine, to describe him as dry, whom the Veda declares as eternal bliss. It makes one feel that the pundit didn't know what God really was. That is why his words were so incoherent. A man once said, "There are many horses in my uncle's cowshed." From that, one could know the man didn't have any horses at all. No one keeps a horse in a cowshed. Some people pride themselves on their riches and power, their wealth, honor, and social position. But these are only transitory. Nothing will remain with you in death. There is a song that runs this way. Remember this, O mind, nobody is your own. Vain is your wandering in this world. Trapped in the subtle snare of Maya as you are, do not forget the mother's name. Only a day or two men honor you on earth as Lord and Master. All too soon that form, so honored now, must needs be cast away when death the Master seizes you. Even your beloved wife, for whom, while yet you live, you fret yourself almost to death, will not go with you then. She too will say goodbye and shun your corpse as an evil thing. One must not be proud of one's money. If you say you are rich, then one can remind you that there are richer men than you, and others richer still, and so on. At dusk the glowworm comes out and thinks that it lights the world, but its pride is crushed when the stars appear in the sky. The stars feel that they give light to the earth, but then the moon rises and the star fades in shame. The moon feels the world smiles at its light and that it lights the earth. Then the eastern horizon becomes red and the sun rises and the moon fades. After a while, it is no longer seen. If wealthy people would think that way, they would get rid of their pride of their wealth. Manilal had provided a sumptuous feast in the celebration of the festival. He entertained the master and the other guests with great love and attention. It was late at night when they returned to their homes. So that's the end of that chapter. Do you have any questions on that? Okay. This is chapter 15, the last visit to Keshav. I always hesitate to add anything to what Sri Ramakrishna is saying because it's so beautiful in itself. I don't, anyway.
I also like to hear your comments about this.
Yeah, but I just enjoy reading it very much. Last visit to Keshav. Wednesday, November 28th, 1883. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, M was pacing the footpath of the circular road in front of the lily cottage where Keshav Chandra Sen lived. He was eagerly awaiting the arrival of Sri Ramakrishna. Keshav's illness had taken a serious turn, and there was very little chance of his recovery. Since the master loved Keshav dearly, he was coming from Dakshineswar to pay him a visit. On the east side of the circular road was Victoria College, where the ladies of Keshav's Brahmo Samaj and their daughters received their education. To the north of the college was a spacious garden house inhabited by an English family. M noted that there was a commotion in the house and wondered what was going on. Presently, a hearse arrived with the drivers dressed in black, and the members of the household appeared looking very sad. There had been a death in the family. Whither goes the soul, leaving behind this mortal body? Pondering this age-old question, M waited, watching the carriage that came from the north. At about 5 o'clock, a carriage stopped in front of the lily cottage, and Sri Ramakrishna got out with Latu and several other devotees, including Rakhal. He was received by Keshav's relatives, who led him and the devotees upstairs to the veranda south of the drawing room. The master seated himself on a couch. After a long wait, he became impatient to see Keshav. Keshav's disciple said that he was resting and he would be there presently. Sri Ramakrishna became more and more impatient and said to Keshav's disciple, "Look here, what need is there of his coming down to see me? Why can't I go in and see him?" Prasanna humbly, "Sir, he will come in a few minutes." Master, "Go away. It is you who are making all this fuss. Let me go in." Prasanna began to talk about Keshav in order to divert the master's attention. He said, "Keshav is now an altogether different person, like you, sir. He talks to the Divine Mother. He hears what the Master says and laughs and cries." When he was told that Keshav talked to the Divine Mother and laughed and cried, the Master became ecstatic. Presently, he went into samadhi. It was winter, and the Master was wearing a green flannel coat with a shawl thrown over it. Actually, in M's house, there's a coat that used to belong to Sri Ramakrishna that's green. So I think it might have been that. He sat straight with his eyes fixed deep in ecstasy. A long time passed in this way. There was no indication of his returning to the normal plane of consciousness. Gradually it became dark, and lamps were lighted in the drawing room where the Master was now to go. While he was slowly coming down to the plane of ordinary consciousness, he was taken there, though with great difficulty. The room was well furnished. At the sight of the furniture, the Master muttered to himself, "These things were necessary before, but of what use are they now?" Seeing Rakali said, "Oh, hello, you are here." Then he seated himself on a couch, and he again lost consciousness of the outer world. And looking around as if seeing someone, he said, "Hello, Mother. I see that you too have come. How you are showing off in your Benares sari. Don't bother me now. Please sit down and be quiet." The Master was in a state of intense divine intoxication. In the well-lighted room, the Brahmo devotees sat around the Master. Latu, Rakal, and M remained near him. He was saying to himself, still filled with divine fervor, "Body and the soul. Body was born, and it will die. But for the soul, there is no death. It is like a betel nut. When the nut is ripe, it doesn't stick to the shell. But when it is green, it is difficult to separate it from the shell. After realizing God, one does not identify oneself anymore with the body. Then one knows that body and soul are two different things." At this moment, Keshav entered the room. He came through the east door. Those who remembered the man who had preached in the town hall or the Brahma Samaj temple were shocked to see this skeleton covered with skin. He could hardly stand. He walked, holding onto the wall for support. With great difficulty, he sat down in front of the couch. In the meantime, Sri Ramakrishna had got down from the couch and was sitting on the floor. Keshav bowed low before the Master and remained in that position a long time, touching the Master's feet with his forehead. Then he sat up. Sri Ramakrishna was still in a state of ecstasy. He muttered to himself and talked to the Divine Mother. Raising his voice, Keshav said, "I am here, sir. I am here." He took Sri Ramakrishna's left hand and stroked it gently. But the Master was in deep samadhi, completely intoxicated with divine love. A stream of words came from his lips as he talked to himself, and the devotees listened to him, spellbound. "Master, as long as a man associated himself with upadhis, so long does he see the manifold, such as Keshav, Prasanna, Amrita, and so forth. But on attaining perfect knowledge, he sees only one consciousness everywhere. The same perfect knowledge, again, makes him realize that the one consciousness has become the universe and its living beings and the 24 cosmic principles. But the manifestation of divine powers are different in different beings. It is he, undoubtedly, who has become everything, but in some cases there's a greater manifestation than in others. Vidyasagar once asked me, Can it be true that God has endowed some with greater power and some with less? I replied, if that were not so, how is it that one man may be stronger than 50? If that were not the case again, how is it that we have all come here to see you? The soul, through which God sports, is endowed with a special power. The landlord may reside in any part of his estate, but he's generally to be found in a particular drawing room. The devotee is God's drawing room. God loves to sport in the heart of his devotee. It is there that his special power is manifest. What is the sign of such a devotee? If you see a man doing great works, you may know that God's special power is manifest through him. The primordial power and the supreme Brahman are identical. You can never think of one without the other. They're like the gem and its brilliance. One cannot think of the brilliance without the gem, nor of the gem without its brilliance. Again, it is like a snake and its wiggling motion. One cannot think of the wiggling motion without the snake, or of the snake without the wiggling motion. It is the primordial power that has become the universe and its living beings and the 24 cosmic principles. It is a case of involution and evolution. That is to say, before creation, the universe and its living beings and the 24 cosmic principles lie involved in the primordial power, and after the creation, they gradually evolve from it. Why do I feel so restless for Rakhal, Narendra, and the other youngsters? Hazra once asked me, when will you think of God if you're always anxious about these boys? Keshav and the others smiled. That worried me greatly. I prayed to the Divine Mother, Mother, see what a fix I'm in. Hazra scolds me because I worry about these young men. Afterward, I asked Bholanath about it, and he said to me that such a state of mind is described in the Mahabharata. How else will a man established in samadhi occupy his mind in the phenomenal world after coming down from samadhi? That is why he seeks the company of devotees endowed with sattva. I gave a sigh of relief when Bholanath told me of the Mahabharata. Sri Ramakrishna used to climb up on the roof and cry out, for his devotees to come to him. And as we just read about Swami Premananda, that he would weep when he actually would leave. Hazra is not to blame. During the period of struggle, one should follow the method of discrimination, not this, and direct the whole mind to God. But the state of perfection is quite different. After reaching God, one reaffirms what formerly one denied. To extract butter, you have to separate it from the buttermilk. Then you discover that the butter and the buttermilk are intrinsically related one to another. They belong to the same stuff. The butter is not essentially different from the buttermilk, nor the buttermilk essentially different from the butter. After realizing God, one knows definitely that it is He who has become everything. In some objects, He is manifested more clearly, and in others, less clearly. When a flood comes from the ocean, all the land is deep underwater. Before the flood, the boat could have reached the ocean only by following a winding course of the river. But after the flood, one can row straight to the ocean. One need not take a roundabout course. After the harvest has been reaped, one need not take the roundabout course along the bulk of the field. One can cross the field at any point. After the realization of God, he is seen in all beings, but his greater manifestation is in man. Again, among men, God manifests himself more clearly in those devotees who are sattvic, in those who have no desire whatever to enjoy women and gold, lust and greed. Where can a man of samadhi rest his mind after coming down from the plane of samadhi? That is why he feels the need of seeking the company of pure-hearted devotees, endowed with sattva and free from attachment to lust and greed. How else could such a person occupy himself in the relative plane of consciousness? He who is Brahman is the Ajna Shakti, the primordial energy. When inactive, it's called Brahman, the Purusha. He is called Shakti or Prakriti when he is engaged in creation, preservation, and destruction. These are the two aspects of reality, Purusha and Prakriti. He who is Purusha is also Prakriti. Both are the embodiments of bliss. If you are aware of the male principle, you cannot ignore the female principle. He who is aware of the father must also think of the mother. Keshav laughed. He who knows darkness also knows light. He who knows night also knows day. He who knows happiness also knows misery. You understand this, don't you? Keshav, yes, sir, I do. Master, my mother. Who is my mother? Ah, she is the mother of the universe. It is she who creates and preserves the world, who always protects her children, and who grants whatever they desire, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. A true son cannot live away from his mother. The mother knows everything. The child only eats, drinks, and makes merry. He doesn't worry himself about things of the world. Keshav, yes, sir, that's quite true. While talking, Sri Ramakrishna regained normal consciousness of the world. With a smile on his face, he conversed with Keshav. The room full of men watched them eagerly and listened to their words. Everybody was amazed to find that neither Keshav nor the master inquired about the other's health. They talked only of God. Master to Keshav, why do the members of the Brahma Samaj dwell so much on God's glories? Is there any need of repeating such thing as, O God, thou hast created the moon and the sun and the stars? Most people are filled with admiration for the garden only. How few care to see its owner. Who is greater, the garden or its owner? After a few drinks at a tavern, do I care to know how many gallons of wine are stored there? One bottle is enough for me. When I met Narendra, I never asked him, who is your father? How many houses does he own? Shall I tell you the truth? Man loves his own riches, and so he thinks that God loves his too. He thinks that God will be pleased if we glorify his riches. Once Shambhu said to me, please bless me, sir, that I may die leaving my riches at the lotus feet of God. I answered him, these are riches only to you. What riches can you offer God? To him, these are mere dust and straw. Once a thief broke into the temple of Vishnu and robbed the image of its jewels. Mathur Babu and I went to the temple to see what was the matter. Addressing the image, Mathur said bitterly, what a shame, Lord. You're so worthless. The thief took all of your ornaments from your body, and you couldn't do a thing about it. Thereupon I said to Mathur, shame on you. How improper your words are. To God, the jewels you talk about are so many lumps of clay. Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, is his consort. Do you mean to say he should spend sleepless nights because a thief has taken a few rupees? You mustn't say such things. Can one ever bring God under control through wealth? He can only be tamed through love. What does he want? Certainly not wealth. He wants from his devotee love, devotion, feeling, discrimination, and renunciation. One looks on God exactly according to one's own inner feeling. Take, for instance, a devotee with excessive tamas. He thinks that the Divine Mother eats goat, so he slaughters one for her. Again, the devotee endowed with rajas cooks rice and various other dishes for the mother. But the sattvic devotee doesn't make any outer show of his worship. People don't even know he's worshiping. He has no flowers. He worships God with mere Ganga water and the leaves of the bell tree. His food offering to the deity consists of sweetened puffed rice or a few candies. Occasionally he'll cook a little rice pudding for the deity. There is another class of devotee, those who are beyond the three gunas. They have the nature of a child. Their worship consists in chanting God's name, just his name. To Keshav with a smile, why is it that you are ill? There is a reason for it. Many spiritual feelings have passed through your body, and therefore it's fallen ill. At the time an emotion is aroused, one understands very little about it. The blow that it delivers to the body is felt only after a long while. I have seen big steamers going by on the Ganges, at the time hardly noticing their passing. But oh my, what a terrific noise is heard after a while when the waves splash against the banks. Perhaps a piece of bank breaks loose and falls into the water. An elephant entering a hut creates havoc within and ultimately shakes it down. The element of divine emotion enters the hut of the body and shatters it to pieces. Do you know what actually happens? When a house is on fire, at first a few things inside burn, and then comes a great commotion. Just so, the fire of knowledge at first destroys such enemies of spiritual life as passion, anger, and so forth. Then comes the turn of the ego. And lastly, a violent commotion is seen in the physical frame. You may think that everything is going to be over, but God will not release you as long as the slightest trace of your illness is left. You simply cannot leave the hospital if your name is registered there, as long as the illness is not perfectly cured. The doctor won't give a permit to go. Why did you register your name in the hospital at all? Everybody laughs. Keshav laughed again and again at the master's allusion to the hospital. Then Sri Ramakrishna spoke of his own illness to Keshav. Hriday used to say, "Never before have I seen such ecstasy for God, and never before have I seen such illness." I was then seriously ill with a stubborn case of diarrhea. It was as if a million ants were clawing at my brain. But all the same, spiritual talk went on day and night. Dr. Rama of Natagore was called in to see me. He found me discussing spiritual truth. "What a madman," he said. "Nothing is left of him but a few bones, and still he's reasoning like that?" Master to Keshav, all depends on God's will. O Mother, all is done after thine own sweet will. Thou art in truth self-willed, Redeemer of mankind. Thou workest thine own work. Men only call it theirs. In order to take full advantage of the dew, the gardener removes the soil from the basura rose down to its very root. The plant thrives better on account of moisture. Perhaps that is why you too are being shaken to the very root. Keshav and the master laugh. It may be that you will do tremendous things when you come back. Whenever I hear you're ill, I become extremely restless. After hearing of your last illness, I used to weep to the Divine Mother in the small hours of the morning. I prayed to her, "O Mother, if anything happens to Keshav, with whom then shall I talk in Calcutta?" Coming to Calcutta, I offered fruits and sweets to the Divine Mother with a prayer for your well-being. The devotees were deeply touched to hear of Sri Ramakrishna's love for Keshav and his longing for the Brahmo leader. Master, but this time, to tell the truth, I didn't feel anxious to that extent. Only for 2 or 3 days did I feel a little worried. Keshav's venerable mother came to the east door of the room, the same door through which Keshav had entered. Umanath said aloud to the master, "Sir, here's Mother saluting you." Sri Ramakrishna smiled. Umanath said again, "Mother asks you to bless Keshav that he may be cured of his illness." Master to Keshav's mother, "Please pray to the Divine Mother, who is the bestower of all bliss. She will take away your troubles." To Keshav, "Don't spend long hours in the inner apartments. You will sink down and down in the company of women. You will feel better if you hear only talk of God." The master uttered those words in a serious voice and then began to laugh like a child. He said to Keshav, "Let me see your hand." He weighed it playfully like a child, and at last he said, "No, your hand is light. Hypocrites have heavy hands." Everybody laughed. Umanath again said to the master from the door, "Mother asks you to bless Keshav." Master gravely, "What can I do?" God alone blesses all. Thou workest thy own work. Men only call it theirs. God laughs on 2 occasions. He laughs when brothers divide the land between them. They put a string across the land and they say to each other, "This side is mine and that side is yours." God laughs and says to himself, "Why, this whole universe is mine." And about a little clod, they say, "This side is mine and that side is yours." God laughs again when the physician says to the mother, weeping bitterly because of her child's desperate illness, "Don't be afraid, mother, I shall cure your child." The physician does not know that no one can save the child if God wills that he should die. All are silent. Just then, Keshav was seized with a fit of coughing, which lasted for a long time. The sign of his suffering made everyone sad. He became exhausted and could stay no longer. He bowed low before the master and left the room, holding on to the wall as before. Some refreshments had been arranged for the master. Keshav's eldest son was seated near him. Amrita introduced the boy and requested Sri Ramakrishna to bless him. The master said, "It is not given to me to bless anyone." With a sweet smile, he stroked the boy's body gently. Amrita, with a smile, "All right, then you do as you please." Master to the devotees, "I cannot say such a thing as, 'May you be healed.' I never ask the Divine Mother to give me the power of healing. I pray to her only for pure love. Is Keshav a small person? He is respected by all, seekers after wealth as well as holy men. I once visited Dayananda, who was then staying in a garden house. I saw he was extremely anxious about Keshav's coming. He went out every few minutes to see whether he had arrived. I learned later that Keshav had made an appointment with him that day. Keshav, I understood, has no faith in the sacrifices and deities mentioned in the Vedas. Referring to this, Dayananda said, "Why, the Lord has created so many things. Could he not make the deities as well?" Continuing, the Master said, Keshav is free from pride of small-minded religious teachers. To many people he has said, "If you have any doubt, go there and have them solved." This was a reference to Sri Ramakrishna. It is my way, too, to say, what shall I do with people's respect? Let Keshav's virtues increase 1,000,000-fold. Keshav is certainly a great man. Everyone respects him, seekers after wealth as well as holy men. Thus did Sri Ramakrishna praise Keshav before the latter's disciples. After partaking of the refreshments, the Master was ready to leave. The Brahmo devotees accompanied him to the cab, which was standing in the street. While coming down the stairs, the Master noticed that there was no light on the ground floor. He said to Amrita and Keshav's other disciples, "These places should be well lighted. A house without light becomes stricken with poverty. Please see that it doesn't happen again." Then Sri Ramakrishna left for Dakshineswar with 1 or 2 devotees. In the drawing room, Jaya Gopal's relatives and neighbors had gathered. Vaikuntha, Jaya Gopal's brother, said to the Master, "Sir, we are worldly people. Please give us some advice." "Master, do your duty in the world after knowing God. With one hand, hold the lotus feet of God, and with the other, do your work." Vaikuntha, "Is the world unreal?" Master, "Yes, it is unreal, as long as one has not realized God. Through ignorance, man forgets God and speaks always of I and mine. He sinks down and down, entangled by Maya, deluded by lust and greed. Maya robs him of his knowledge to such an extent that he cannot find the way of escape, though such a way does exist." Listen to a song. When such delusion veils the world through Mahamaya's spell, that Brahma is bereft of sense, and Vishnu loses consciousness, what hope is left for men? You all know from your experience how impermanent the world is. Look at it this way. How many people have come into the world and again passed away? People are born and they die. This moment the world is, and the next it is not. It is impermanent. Those you think will be your own will not exist for you when you close your eyes in death. Again, you see people who have no immediate relatives, and yet for the sake of a grandson, they will go to Benares and lead a holy life. Oh, what will become of my Haru then, they argue. The narrow channel first is made, and then the trap is set. But open through the passage lies the fish. Once safely through the gate, do not come out again. Yet even though the way leads forth, encased within its own cocoon, the worm remains to die. This kind of world is illusory and impermanent. A neighbor. Why, sir, should one hold on to God with one hand and the world with the other? Why should one even stretch out one hand to hold the world if it is impermanent? Master, the world is not impermanent if one lives there after knowing God. Listen to another song. O mind, you do not know how to farm. Follow lies the field of your life. If you had only worked it well, how rich a harvest you might reap. Hedge it about with Kali's name. If you would keep your harvest safe, this is the stoutest hedge of all, for death himself cannot come near it. Did you listen to the song? Hedge it about with Kali's name. If you would keep your harvest safe, surrender yourself to God, and you will achieve everything. This is the stoutest hedge of all, for death himself cannot come near it. I think I'll stop there. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is he still the same. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all.